It gives me, once again, great joy and happiness to invite each one of you who have joined for our Zoom meeting in the study of God's instructions to his people, especially those of us living in these last days, and how in meeting these various challenges in our lives, that we will be able to discern God's way of how we should relate to various people that we meet day to day. Our study today will continue from Proverbs chapter 26, and we will pick up verses 5 and 6. Proverbs 26, verse 5 and 6. Reading the word, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. He who sends a message by the hand of a fool cuts off his own feet and drinks violence." This is actually part of the earlier two verses, 3 and 4, where the wise man is dealing with fools. In our day-to-day life too, we will meet many people who are foolish. Foolish because they do not exercise wisdom that they seek from God. A fool is usually wise in his own eyes, but maybe even respected by people who are living with him, and probably he is wise in the eyes of the world, the way how he deals with and his relation to and his ability to be like the people of the world. But we recognize these people as foolish because we see that there is a lack of divine wisdom in their lives. And so we saw in the previous verses how it is as useless in using or in talking with a foolish person. And therefore there, in the 4th verse, the wise man says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly." Because, of course, the reason given is that if you engage with a fool for a longer time, you also may become and drawn to his level of foolishness. And so it is not recommended to spend much time in communication or in conversation with a fool. But in verse 5 today, we see, "Answer a fool according to his folly." There seems to be in these two verses, maybe you see a slight contradiction. At one time, he says, "Do not answer." At another time, he says, "Answer." We have to perhaps understand why it is spoken thus. Here we see circumstances where foolish people should be taken up, how we should deal with them. While these two verses present a paradox in dealing with fools, but we understand there is not always one way how we can deal with things, and especially critical issues like meeting with a fool. Either you can ignore, you can be quiet and not to take up a discussion or a communication with the foolish, or to relate to them. In verse 5, he says, answer a fool according to his foolishness, lest he be wise in his own eyes. If a fool is not met in his terms, speaking in the way that he should understand, and let him know what his folly is. But if you do not speak, this foolish person will think that what he is speaking, what he is doing is right. And certainly it becomes right in his own eyes. His own foolishness may appear to him right. And so the wise man is telling us to answer a fool in a way that would expose his foolishness. Or as the saying goes, beat them in their own game. Meet them where they are, so they do not think that their foolishness is actually right and being accepted by you. If you don't answer them, they will think that they have won over you. And so we should be careful in answering them, not necessarily in a very long debate or discussion, but a sharp, pointed response which shows that there is foolishness in their words, which prevents them to see that their ways are going to fail, and that you as a wise person are able to show them a better way. But leaving a fool without answering, if you don't respond, the fool will feel that he is unchallenged, that what he's saying is vindicative, and therefore he is wise. Look at their foolishness. And so in answering a fool, you should be able to show him his foolishness and help him to realize his condition. It does not mean that you should become foolish like himself, but rather using your wisdom to counter their folly in ways that we know Jesus gives us a wonderful example. Jesus, in speaking to people who came to answer him, Jesus actually used these two ways of dealing with a fool that the wise man is telling us. One way, of course, is to keep silent. Another is to speak in their terms, showing them their foolishness. If you reply according to their error, by showing like a mirror their own foolishness or their shallowness, the fool may not accept. But by giving godly wisdom in a godly way, I think what the wise man is intending is that the way how we show godly wisdom in a godly manner is important. Even godly wisdom, if it is not given in a godly way, it can be misrepresented, misunderstood, and not accepted. So, the manner in which you give the divine wisdom is also important. Unless you correct a fool's ideas and his wisdom, they will continue in their error, and consequently, of course, they will have to suffer the consequences. But it is advised that a wise person, in answering a fool, must show helpfulness in teaching them what is truth in a loving way. Sometimes more important than speaking things which are logical and understandable is the manner in which we speak. And sometimes love can conquer all things. A loving way of saying things can actually prepare the heart to accept divine wisdom, and showing them their foolishness will be accepted if the way in which we speak is also important. That will actually prepare the manner of showing and speaking, will help prepare to receive the message you are giving. And so, in speaking to a fool, we should show much love and concern for his well being. And when a fool is able to sense this kind of expression of love, we will see that they will be ready to answer. Peter, writing in his first epistle, chapter 3, verse 15, he says, "But in your heart honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." When you preach the gospel, there are people who will certainly challenge you. You have to be prepared to make a defense or to show the reason why what you believe. It is not enough to tell what you believe, but also tell why you believe. When you make such a defense to people who asks you the reason for that hope that is in you, they will accept it when you do, as the Apostle Peter tells us, with gentleness and respect. Even though you know that you have the truth that the other person needs to know, but when you speak to them respectfully, gently, you are preparing their heart to be receptive and to accept the truth that you are speaking. Likewise, when you speak to such people who are foolish, the manner in which you speak, dealing with them respectfully and gently, can go a long way when a fool can even recognize the wisdom that you're giving, it can help clear anything that may come as a hindrance. We do not attack a fool for what he is speaking, but rather when you compliment and when he sees your loving spirit, he will be willing to accept. And therefore, in giving an appropriate answer to foolishness, the manner in which you give is important, and not merely to show them how their behavior or their words are foolish, but show them through love and kindness. This can go a long way. Jesus, as he met with his accusers, he was silent in some circumstances, and he spoke at other times. When you agree with the fool and accept him, that will immediately change his way of thinking. Instead of contradicting him, you can show acceptance and gradually win him by the spirit with which you speak. Jesus, though he was accused, he remained silent. Silence is also a way of rebuke. People see that if you do not answer, that may make your accuser to be angry. But silence, in a way, is a dignified rebuke. And so this did even agree with some of those who are accusing him, even like Pilate or Herod, who were trying Jesus during his trial, were surprised to see Jesus not responding to them. But there were other times when Jesus had to respond. And in so doing, he corrected them and he showed them who he really was. And so we see in these two Proverbs how we should respond to someone, especially to people who are foolish. Either you should know when to be silent and when to speak out. When we should not answer a fool, or when you should respond to a fool. This certainly needs divine wisdom to evaluate the situation. It may be complex situations that you will face, and no problem can be solved by one way. For the answer is not usually in one way, but it could be also using the other options. Just like here, in dealing with a fool, there are times when you should be quiet, there are times when you should be speaking forth. In doing so, we certainly need divine wisdom. And the pattern that Jesus, our Savior, showed, his silence and his answers were equally powerful and worthy of who he is. Silence, too, conveyed a dignified rebuke. And his response, in a way, helped his accusers, his enemies, to know what the truth is. This is really a very important way how we should deal with people who we meet from time to time. Wisdom should be employed to govern our tongue, the way how we speak. That we should discover the right time to speak. We should discover the right way and manner to speak. And also in choosing the right words that can help us to meet the situation wisely. Knowing the condition, we should be able to make a decision so that our words and our speech will be beneficial. In the second proverb, another important lesson is taught to us, and that is not to send a message by the hand of a fool, somebody who is not equipped and not ready, somebody who is not trustworthy, somebody who is not faithful. In doing so, it says, it is almost like cutting your own feet and drinking poison. Choosing a fool to do an errand is certainly going to result in serious consequences. We cannot expect a good result or the message rightly being carried when you place that message into the hands of a fool. You cannot be sure whether he understood your message. You cannot be sure whether he will rightly transmit it. So it is such a situation is like harming oneself. And we should be careful what kind of people we may use in sending messages, unless you are quite familiar, unless you are quite knowledgeable about the person whom you are sending. Because you give a message to a fool, it is only showing how the attempt can be futile and self-harming to the one who is sending. It could be a message that is misdelivered. A fool can distort a message. That's leading to how useless it is and how self-inflicted could be the harm for the one who sends. And so this, in a way, reinforces the need for wisdom. Just as much as when we should not speak to a person or when we should respond to them, but in the same manner, not to involve in a situation where you entrust this to a foolish person. We have a very interesting story in the Old Testament. In 2 Samuel chapter 18, in 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 19 onwards, we have God's people, Israel, having to face a problem within their own nation. Absalom, who decides to, against his father's will and knowledge, to become a king. And then, having mustered support, he wanted, in a way, to sabotage the throne of David. And so when Absalom was fleeing with his men away from David and his army that was ready to attack him and subdue him, and as the conflict was in progress, David remained in Jerusalem, the capital, and messages were sent about what was happening on the battlefield. And Joab, the army commander, wanted to send the message about Absalom's death. And as people were called to send the message, there was a man named Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, who said, "Let me run." He volunteers himself to carry this message and take the news to the king, while another man was chosen by Joab to deliver the message. Of course, Ahimaaz knew that David and his army won the victory against their enemies. And so when Joab chose a Cushite to tell the king what he has seen, a message to be true to truth should be a report of what somebody has seen. And so this Cushite, who had seen what happened in the battlefield, was asked by Joab to run and deliver the message. But Ahimaaz himself volunteered, and he ran using shortcuts to reach even before the Cushite could arrive. And when people from Jerusalem saw Ahimaaz running, and the news went to David, and the watchman said, "Yes, we see a man with a noose in his mouth, and this runner looks like Ahimaaz." People, of course, can recognize how any individual would run. And so the king asked him, "Is he a good man and coming with good news?" And Ahimaaz said, "All is well." And he blessed and praised the king and told him, and the king asked, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" That Ahimaaz, who did not really have the message, who did not see what happened on the battlefield, he replied, "When Joab sent the king's servant and me with your servant, I saw great tumult, but I did not know what it is about." Here is a person who saw a big group, a crowd of people, but he didn't know exactly what happened. And so they had to put this man away because he carried a message. He ran carrying a message that he did not know what it was all about. And of course, then the Cushite came and related to the king what had happened. But here is a case where a messenger who went to bear a message, but he did not have a message. This is just like calling a foolish person to run, for he does not know what the truth is. And this kind of an activity would be really useless. So would be when you choose a fool. You cannot expect a good result in sending a message in the hands of a fool. It can be a misleading experience of failure for a person who is called upon to carry the message, should know the message, should have the message rather than simply having a false or a general knowledge of what happened, but not really the main truth and facts. And so we should be careful how we deal with foolish people. We have learned in these couple of Proverbs that we should be wise, sometimes not to answer a fool. Through our silence, we may be able to teach him and rebuke him, or by speaking in such manner that a foolish person will be open to understand. But the way how we deal with a fool is so important, so that we can help them to recognize their foolishness and to turn them to divine wisdom. But in the New Testament, we have an interesting manner in which Christ, using his apostles to tell them how God can even use the foolish things of this world. Remember, a foolish thing and not a fool. Let me read 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27. But God has chosen the foolish things of this world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of this world to put to shame things which are mighty. The distinction between a foolish thing is what people think as being simple and foolish, but a foolish person, we know, is different. The weaker things, the unrecognizable things, are those which God uses to put to shame the wise. People who are wise in their own eyes, people who are wise in the worldly things, to put them to shame, God uses weak things, foolish things, like the disciples of Jesus. They were foolish in the sense of this world. They were weak, they were uneducated, untrained, simple people, weak people, as we might say. But through them, God used to give the gospel even to people who are wise. These disciples went and stood before kings, rulers, high officials. Why? Because God's Spirit was working through them and using them as his instruments. We may think that we are like foolish things, unrecognized, unknown, but even such people can be used by God. God uses the simple and humble people, weak people of this world, to do his ministry. God wants people not who are qualified with wisdom and knowledge of this world, but God wants people who are willing, and God would qualify them then to do his work. It is not our qualification that makes us worthy for the task, but it is our willingness to do it, which God sees. And so God, seeing our willingness, he is able to use us. And so let us be cautious and careful in the way how we deal with the foolish people in this world. But remember, though we may be a simple, humble, foolish people considered by the world, our willingness is what God sees and uses us in his cause. May God bless each one of us to be such humble people whom God can use for his mighty work. God bless you and have a wonderful day.